European allies appear to have rid America's latest Ukraine peace proposal from several made in Russia demands that would give the Kremlin sway over both Kyiv's future and the security of the entire continent. The Trump administration has admitted that the initial 28-point plan was partly written by the Kremlin, causing alarm among Washington's staunchest European allies, including Poland. Tonight I'm going on the record with Jan Brzezinski, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a former senior US diplomat, to ask the unthinkable question: has America been turned by Putin against its allies? Ian, good evening, welcome to the show.
It's good to be back.
So let me start with Prime Minister Tusk, who said yesterday during a meeting with other European leaders, the peace agreement, no matter who signs it, with whom, may weaken or undermine the security of Poland or all of Europe. The Russians are trying to weaken European security as well. Is he exaggerating?
No, he's not. I mean, the 28-point program, which is still evolving, is a horrible starting point for this phase of negotiations. I mean, think about it. It's probably the worst act of appeasement, or near act of appeasement, since the Munich Agreement that Chamberlain signed in 1938, forcing a sovereign nation to give up territory it controls to an aggressor state. That's what this agreement starts off with. It then asserts that that victim has to reduce and have a cap put on its armed forces. It goes on to say that that country can no longer accept foreign allies that come in and help defend its sovereignty and its interests, their interests. It's amazing to me because there are no territorial demands on the aggressor. There are no caps being expected upon the aggressor's forces, the country that attacked Ukraine and was just attacking Ukraine last night with a brutal barrage of missiles. But
what got Tusk and other European leaders really worried this time? Because in a sense, this is the same tune we've heard before from the Russians, right? But what got them really worried is the European part of it. That, in a sense...
Well, they should be worried about the European part, and they should be really worried about what it does to Ukraine.
They are.
That's why I'm emphasizing those things.
All right.
They should be particularly worried about how this initial piece of paper that came out reflects the Russian narrative on the causes of the war. I mean, it's stunning to me that the United States supported a document that bought into Putin's allegations that Ukraine is run by Nazis, when in fact it's run by a hero, Zelensky, who's Jewish. It then calls upon the Ukrainians to have elections, buying into Putin's assertion that Zelensky lacks political legitimacy.
Yeah, as if Putin held elections.
Exactly. They should be asking Russia to have elections. This is an unfair document. It's a document that would weaken Ukraine, leave it more vulnerable to future attack. It's a document that would embolden Putin and other hegemons around the world.
Okay, so the German Foreign Minister Wadefull said today that even if peace is reached, because these negotiations are ongoing and let's see what emerges from it, he said that even if peace was reached, Russia's imperial design on Europe would live on. What does it mean in practice? How do you see this?
Well, that is a very realistic and accurate assertion, that regardless of the outcome of this this conflict, as long as Putin is in office, he's going to continue pursuing his revanchist, his hegemonic ambitions. And so therefore, peace has to be just and it has to provide enduring security. And that's going to require bringing Ukraine into NATO. It's going to require security guarantees from Ukraine's allies and partners, which is going to have to be manifest through the presence of their forces on Ukrainian territory.
So going back to these 28 points and later modifications, because the Europeans managed already to modify some of these points and probably remove some of the most controversial ones. But from your point of view, what were the most contagious ones when it comes to Europe's security and NATO's future, rather than just Ukraine?
Forcing Ukraine to give up territory, recognizing Russian sovereignty over the territory it has illegally seized, capping Ukrainian forces, therefore handicapping, making it weaker, preventing Western forces from deploying to Ukraine to defend Ukraine, which leaves Ukraine even further vulnerable. Inferences that the United States would not be directly involved in the active defense of Ukraine through the positioning of forces, absolving Russia of any responsibilities for the atrocities that it's committed, and in fact even rewarding Russia by making it a partner in Ukraine's reconstruction. All of that weakens Ukraine and emboldens Putin.
Okay. So now let's focus on Ukraine. There is a body of argument out there coming from, reputable analysts who say that Ukraine does need to settle this conflict now because it is exhausted and the victory over Russia seems to be elusive. It's 4 years. So, unless NATO engages directly in the conflict, where we know there is no appetite for that in the US or in Europe. So, for example, Neil Ferguson, a renowned historian and undoubtedly a friend of Ukraine, and he posted this. Contrary to recent press speculation, the draft 28-point plan for peace in Ukraine is in fact a reasonable basis for negotiations. Journalists can gripe about it, but wars are not ended by opinion pieces. Wars are ended by either victory or compromise. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I think he's wrong. Look, there is some truth to what he says, and that is Ukraine is being ground down by this war. Putin has made two assumptions, unfortunately both which are right. Is that time is on his side, Ukraine is getting weaker, getting closer and closer to the breaking point, and the West lacks the will to exercise its overmatch against him. So that's why he drives on. So Putin has been conditioned to believe the West has lost the will to fight in the defense of its interests and its values. So in order to reverse that situation, to change the correlation of forces in the eyes of a former Soviet KGB agent, the West has to act boldly. And it has the resources to do that. Think about it. Just NATO alone, has $55 trillion in GDP. Russia, less than $2. NATO has a defense budget of $1.5+ trillion. Russia, with a full-scale invasion against Ukraine going on, is still spending less than $200 billion. And then the ideological and informational advantages the West has. The West has the mass necessary to squash this invasion if it has the boldness to act on that. And Niall is right. If you're going to end this war on terms that are going to be just, if you're going to end this war on terms that are going to provide enduring stability, you're going to have to defeat Putin. Putin requires two things to cause him to change course. One, he has to see his territorial gains, these illegal territorial gains, to be put at risk. And then two, he has to see his own regime being put at risk. The West has the capacity to do that. It just has to act.
Right, but the counter argument is that Europe is still struggling to ramp up its, let's say, arms production so that it could be used by Ukraine. Even though it's now paying for American arms, the Americans are not so willing to sell either because they also face shortages. Whereas Putin managed to switch his economy to war footing and is producing arms at scale. So this disparity is not something that can be bridged quickly, and harsh winter is coming and it's the 4th year of war. So
I think it can, that gap in terms of production can't be reversed just overnight. But can you really think that a country with $2 trillion is able to push around a community of $10, $12 trillion?
Well, it has for the past 4 years.
That's a political issue. That's a moral issue. It's not a capability issue.
Okay.
Is Europe really exercising its military might? Is it really exercising the full spectrum of economic sanctions? Is it really undertaking offensive information campaigns against the Russian regime? The answer is no, just in the same way the answer is no for the United States.
Right. Okay, but let's assume for a moment that this will to fight is not going to materialize anytime soon.
We have a problem.
Yes, we have a problem. But then going back to the earlier argument, how about a Finland scenario for Ukraine? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your dad, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was national security advisor to President Carter, advocated for the Finlandization of Ukraine back in 2014, together with Henry Kissinger. They wrote a piece together. So, Finland emerged from the Second World War beaten, but not completely defeated. And they managed to preserve their sovereignty, their independence, despite neutrality. And now they're in NATO, in the European Union, and they're armed to the teeth. So they used several years, if not decades, to actually bring back the state of affairs that they like. Isn't that a plausible scenario also for Ukraine?
I'm very uncomfortable with it because I think the determination...
Did you argue with your dad about this?
Yes, actually, that was one of the few points that we had disagreements on.
Okay, tell us why.
Well, he was worried that the West wouldn't have the will necessary to fight for Ukraine.
So he was right.
To a certain degree, till today, he has certainly been right in that regard. But with Finland, there was a loss of territory, but Finland also was buttressed by a very strong and robust alliance. And it was never really clear in the Soviet eyes that the West wouldn't come to the defense of Finland. Right now, we don't have that situation. And I don't think, based on the weakness of the West's response over the last decade, basically following the Finland model is going to be enough to deter Putin from following on with another assault after some temporary ceasefire.
So you believe the Finland scenario is not going to work because Putin will press on, unlike Stalin, who was satisfied with Finland's neutrality. Yep. So in that sense, Finland's fate is different from Poland's, where Stalin prioritized controlling Poland like he now controls Ukraine.
It's not an appropriate model because there's a level of determination in Putin that you didn't get from the leaders of the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
But from Stalin's point of view, the reason why he's put Poland under the Soviet yoke was exactly that, the same logic as Putin's. The difference between Poland then, at the end of the Second World War, was that Poland had no government, no army, and didn't stand real chance of fighting off the Soviet takeover. Whereas Ukraine is actually quite successfully defending its line. It has a government in place. It's supported by allies. Poland didn't get that support, and the United States walked away from Poland in 1945. So Ukraine is actually in a stronger position than Poland was in 1945. So I'm going back to my Finland scenario here.
Well, in 1945, the West was exhausted. The West was tired. Millions had been sacrificed, and there was a real desire to put an end to the war. So Stalin didn't really have, as you pointed out, the pushback. Today, we're in a slightly different situation. The West is supporting Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting, but Ukraine's getting weaker and weaker. The West is in a far more robust position financially, militarily, than it was in the end of World War II. Again, it's a matter of the willingness to fight for one's interests, and for the long term, that's lacking here. It's not resources. The West isn't handicapped by fatigue. It's handicapped by a lack of political leadership.
So in your opinion, the bottom line is that there should be no ceasefire, which is detrimental to Ukraine's interest at this stage?
No, I would put it this way. I mean, as much as I believe that we could actually enable Ukraine to take back territory because we have the capacity in the West, I think we could go for a secondary objective, which would be to attain a ceasefire to stop the killing, so to speak, establish a security for Ukraine that would deter Russia, including Putin, from reigniting that attack through a robust defense posture in Ukraine, and then basically subject Putin and his regime long-term to economic pressures that over time, over years, may make them reconsider their desire to hold on to the territories they've illegally seized.
So it's more of a North Korea, South Korea scenario?
Exactly. That's the near-term outcome I think we should be shooting for. And we should be shooting for with a certain amount of determination before we lose that chance because Ukraine weakens too much.
There were reports that the US administration is actually divided because first they said they were the authors of the 28-point plan. then Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, well, actually, it was the Russians who put this forward. We just passed it on. Donald Trump first said he wants a deadline for accepting it. Then he said, oh, I can be flexible. What's your reading of the dynamic of this entire diplomatic push?
This is an administration that is trying to run these negotiations with a very small group of inside advisors around Trump, who are basically divorced from the rest of the U.S. government establishment because they distrust the deep state, the State Department, the civilians in the Department of Defense, as you pointed out, the experts. So they're running this with a series of people who have no experience in these issues, and they're running by the seat of their pants.
And how is the American public viewing this?
With discomfort. I mean, it was really interesting to me to see that a vast majority of Republicans, including the MAGA base, do not like the idea of forcing Ukraine to give up territory it controls. So there's not much political support. And this has been one of the few issues where Republican leadership in Congress have been actually willing to stand up against Trump on this. So he's getting pressure not only from the Europeans, but also politically inside the United States. And you got to understand that you're asking where this is coming from. Trump has always been skeptical of Ukraine. He's never really liked Zelensky. He feels that Zelensky contributed to his impeachment in his first term.
Which is a fantasy.
Which is a fantasy, but that's his perception. He has always been interested in big economic deals with Russia. He's more comfortable with dealing with authoritarians because they get things done quickly, versus democracies where there's more process and time. And so it's not surprising to me that he's kind of slipped back into a document that really was a Russian wish list on how to end this conflict. And above all, Trump now wants to wash his hands of this conflict. It's a political liability to him, in his view.
Because he didn't deliver on the promise to bring peace quickly and to use his allegedly good relationship with Vladimir Putin to...
He used to tell his team, I'm told, when he got elected, or during the transition and soon after he was elected, that I'm going to own this conflict if I don't get it fixed in 100 days. And he doesn't want to have that albatross around his neck as he thinks. So now he's very keen to get it over with.
Well, in some sense, this is reassuring because it shows no bigger game is in town, like a strategic shift in U.S. approach. But this is something I want to ask you because, at the end of the day, the Europeans have largely done what Trump and his administration asked them to do. They increased their military spending to the levels that only 2 years ago were unthinkable. They are paying for U.S. arms for Ukraine, which was an explicit demand. They are weaning themselves off Russian gas and oil. Maybe not as fast as everybody would wish, but they're doing it, right? And they're arming themselves. So in a sense, they have kept their promise to Donald Trump. On top of that, if you look at it, the EU has given Trump a sweet deal when it comes to the tariffs, against criticism at home, where people were encouraging the European Commission, the executive body, to fight hard over the tariffs. They folded. So in a sense, Trump got everything he wanted from the Europeans, and now they're getting a sense that it doesn't help much. We're getting stuffed. So my question to you is, isn't that a sort of a serious strategic shift in the U.S. approach?
Under Trump is trying to impose on the United States a major shift in its outlook and relationship with the world as it relates to U.S. national security interests. And there are two things that really are profoundly different that he brings to the table from 8 decades of American foreign and national security policy. First, and we'll probably see this in his national security strategy, which will be released in the coming days, weeks, or maybe even before the end of the year. And it will probably be a homeland defense-focused document. Of course, every national security document focuses first and foremost on homeland defense. What's going to be different in 2 respects is this. First, he's going to be abandoning the idea, I'm projecting, that America should be projecting forward to protect its interests at home. We did that over 8 decades, deploying to Europe, to Japan and Korea. He wants to bring those forces home just to focus strictly on homeland defense from our borders. And second, he brings to the table a perspective that no longer regards Europe as the home of vital U.S. interests. interests that are worth fighting and dying for, which was the basis for projecting forward. That is a very different outlook on the world, and will bring a very different approach to the transatlantic relationship. That is where Trump would like to bring us. And that is how he's approaching Ukraine, because he doesn't see the United States as having a vital interest at stake in this conflict.
Right. So does that partly explain why the US is at the moment supporting practically any party in Europe that wants to either weaken NATO or the European Union?
You know, I don't know if he is intentionally going after and trying to weaken NATO or undermine the European Union.
Well, some of his officials openly talk about it.
They talk about it, but you know, if you don't spend that kind of time in Europe if you don't think you have vital interests in Europe.
Okay.
So they just don't like the concepts. What they're doing is they're retracting America's security commitments abroad. You know, when they talk about burden sharing, it's not because they're really interested in the United States and Europe standing together to address shared interests, to address shared threats to shared interests in Europe. It's because he wants to reduce our forces there, and he's using it as a rhetorical instrument to justify that retraction.
But Poland is banking on US troops' presence in Poland. So is Trump going to make an exception for Poland?
You know, I think it's going to be hard for him to. If I had to predict, I predict that there will be a continued U.S. presence in Poland under Trump, but reduced. I mean, look at it. He's already taken a slice out of Romania, withdrawing one brigade. It was almost a kind of a test run of his national security strategy. See how the Europeans react. See how people at home react. It's perhaps part of a salami slice tactic.
Right.
You know, and in Poland, the risk that Poland has is that the vast majority of the U.S. military presence here is rotational. It's not permanent. Only Rydzikowo, the air defense facility there, and our 5th Corps headquarters forward are permanent. The rest are rotational. Those can be ended very quickly.
Right. Okay, we have to move on. So I wanted to move on to perhaps other aspect of the Trump strategy, if there is one. Namely that senior figures in the Trump administration have been talking about the strategic objective of trying to pull Russia away from China, from this dependency on China. And that these deals that you mentioned, business deals that Trump is waving in front of Putin and his cronies, is to try to pull them away from China. And I'm going to go back to your dad again, who once remarked that, you know, Russia faces a choice, either aligning with the West or getting devoured by China. And China is in good process of devouring Putin, and he must be aware of that. So maybe he is genuinely interested in sort of changing tack.
You know, my father was always reminding me that we had to take a firm stand against Russia, but always have a hand of partnership out there. Because the objective should be to have a constructive relationship with Russia. But he wasn't naive about Russian leadership. And I don't think he would agree with the assertion that it's a realistic objective to transform Putin into a partner.
So this, if I translate this correctly, that means that China-Russia relationship is not going to disappear.
It's not going to break away, because Putin would have to basically give up his objectives, which is, you know, the recreation of the Soviet Empire. And to do that, he's going to need resources, and those resources are coming from China.
Right. We're coming to an end. I wanted to ask you this. You know, when NATO was created in the 50s, in the face of then Russian threats to Western Europe, the first chief of the alliance, the British politician Lord Ismay, defined its purpose as trying to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Now it seems that everything in that sentence is the other way around. The Russians are in, or trying to get in. The Americans are half out, and the Germans are up. So, you know, Poland has bet the house on Pax Americana. Can the Polish people still trust America, or has Poland become a pawn in a big geopolitical game the US is playing?
Europe, Poland included, are going to have a trying time over the next 3 years when it comes down to sustaining the transatlantic security relationship in the way that you and I grew up to understand. But I would also look at the Poles and Europeans in the eyes and say, take the long bet on America. Because when you look at the policies that are coming from the Trump administration, they are coming not from the American public or from the US Congress. They are coming from President Trump and a small insular group of extreme advisors, extremist advisors. They're aggrieved, they're nativist, and they are driving the foreign policy apparatus. If you look more broadly at the American politic, you get a very different picture of where America would like to go, is willing to go.
So you think this can be reversed?
I think, look at this poll. You and I were talking about this Ronald Reagan Institute poll that was done in July of the MAGA base, the men and women in red hats, cheer behind Trump. 74% of them, 73% of them believe America should be active in world affairs. 84% of them believe in a value-based policy.
I hate to interrupt you, but we have to finish. So let's finish on this optimistic note. Ian, thank you very much.
Bet on America.
Thank you.
Long term.
All right. Thank you very much for watching. This was On the Record. See you next week.